Hello and welcome to Creative Sparkle. My name's Holly and today we're doing an art journal prompt list, so grab your art supplies and let's get crafting. So I thought for this week's prompt list I would work in a different kind of book, so we've just got the 1A4 page rather than the 2 pages, because maybe you don't have a book that you can work in. So for the 1 page we're going to start with prompt number 1, which is to use words and phrases cut from magazines to cover your page for the base. So just choose any magazine that you have that's available. I'm working from a magazine that I had in storage. So I'm just going through and selecting any of the titles that I can see might fit with the page, and once I've cut them out I'm going to stick them down onto my page. Any magazine that you have available to you will do absolutely fine, just as long as you've got something that works for your page. You could use a newspaper if you don't have a magazine, anything that you can get titles from, leaflets, whatever you have available to you, and cut them out and we'll get them stuck down in the background. So you can see here I'm just organising the titles that I have so that they completely cover the page, and I'm going to use Mod Podge to stick them down onto the page as well. If you don't have Mod Podge, obviously you can use whatever you have available, PVA or school glue. You could use a Pritt stick, glue stick, whatever you have available to you, and you don't have to necessarily cover them on the page like I have done here. You can do them however you wish. So once we've got all those stuck down, we'll move on to prompt number 2, which is to add a wash of pastel colour onto the page. So with the pastel colour I've decided actually to go with tissue paper rather than the normal paint that I would use. So I've chosen this blue tissue paper and I'll get that stuck down again with the Mod Podge. So I'm just going to put a layer of that over and stick it down bit by bit as I go. And then once I've stuck that down, I think it's not quite as pastel as I wanted it to be, so I'm then going to put a wash of gesso over the top for that as well. You don't have to use tissue paper if you don't have that available. You don't have to use the same colour as I have. Use what you have and what you think will suit your page the best. So now that the wash is done, I'll move on to prompt number 3, which is to scrape paint onto the page in a few places. So obviously I've cut away the excess of tissue paper, and the paint that I've chosen is the colour Iris. So I'm just going to use a palette knife and just scrape it onto the page as the prompt said. So once we're finished with scraping the paint, we'll move on to prompt number 4, which is to use a comb to make marks on the layout. So I was looking for a comb and I couldn't find one. So I've got this strange palette knife that kind of looks like a comb and I'm using that same iris and then another colour which is blush pink, I believe, and I'm just mixing them together so that I've got a colour that suits the page in my opinion, and then I'm just going to scrape it onto the page with the comb looking palette knife. If you don't have a comb available to you, just find something that relates to that kind of shape and I'm sure it will turn out great. So once you're happy with the comb effect, we'll move on to prompt number 5, which is to add interest to the page using a stencil. So the stencil I've chosen to use is this chevron stencil, and I'm just going to use white acrylic paint to go through the stencil with the sponge applicator. If you would prefer to use modelling paste to add some interest to your page, then do that. I just decided to go with the sponge applicator on this occasion. I did decide that I wanted to add the chevrons both vertically and horizontally because I thought it went well with the comb marks that I did earlier, and once we've finished that, we can move on to the next prompt. So the next prompt, which is prompt number 6, is to choose or add a focal image that includes a flower or a hat. A bit of a random one, but I've chosen to use a flower. So this napkin is something that I had available in my stash. So I'm going to stick it down on some white card with some Mod Podge, and here you can see that I've applied it to the card, and I'm just going to stick it in that corner, and I've trimmed away any of the excess as well. So the next prompt is prompt number 7, is to add something to the page that is flying. So again, I came across another napkin that I have, and it's this one with some deer with butterfly wings and horns, and it's a very strange creature, but I thought it went well with the page. So I did the same thing again. I stuck it down with Mod Podge onto some card and trimmed away the excess and fussy cut it, and I'm just going to stick it like it's coming out of the flower. So moving on to the next prompt, which is prompt number 8, we're going to doodle or zentangle over the spread. So you can do any kind of doodling over the spread. You could draw a border or anything that you like. So I've chosen a blue Sharpie because the background is mainly blue, and I thought that went quite well. And I'm just going to outline everything that I have here just so that it pops off the page a little bit more. So once I've finished with the blue Sharpie, I'll then move on to a pink one, and I'm going to add some highlights and shadows on those flowers that I've got there, just so that they pop as well from the page a bit more, and then we can see the details a bit more as well. So once we've finished adding the doodling, we'll move on to prompt number 9, which is to add splatters to your page. So I've chosen to go with the colour green, and I've chosen this sap green to do some splatters on my page. So there is some green on the page, but there isn't much, and so I wanted to just make it a bit more cohesive. So I've added some water, some acrylic paint, and I will use this fan brush to add some splatters. So once your splatters are done, doesn't take long, we'll move on to the 10th and final prompt, which is to add a title to your page from a magazine. So we're sticking with the magazine theme from the background, and I've found this title which says "Where All the Weird Things Are," which I thought was quite apt for this page. So I'm just cutting it out, and I'm going to stick that down, and then just before I stick it down, I'm just going to use a green distress ink just to do the edges there, just so that it stands out a bit more and brings a bit more green into the page. So the ink that I'm using is Mowed Lawn, and I'm going to use a blending tool just to go around the edges of the words there. So once I've got that stuck down, that's the page finished. So thank you again for joining me today. If you do decide to take part in the prompts list, please do tag me on Instagram with your creations with the hashtag #SparklePrompts. The full prompt list will be at the end of the video, along with some pictures of the final result. And I will see you next time, where we will turn your creative spark into a creative sparkle. Thanks. Bye.